Hi everyone, I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable, Behavior Explained. Hi everyone, I'm Kelly O'Horo, and welcome to Adaptable, Behavior Explained. Today, we're going to dive into Mel Robbins' latest book, The Let Them Theory, and we're going to explore her concepts and how they can be applied in real life. I loved this book. I have been waiting for a book like this that's great for the layperson. And I've been listening to Mel for a really long time, and I just love her delivery, her natural candor, and she's just so cool to listen to. And I love how she's brought mental health concepts into light so that we have other resources. And so I want to get as many of you to read this book as possible because it was just so good. My husband and I listened to it in audio form and on the way to and from as we were traveling recently. And I love that on the Audible form, I can check out each chapter. And then I can also share with clients, like, you need to go listen or read chapter 10 or chapter 13 as an additional support for their therapy. So I think that this is really good. If you're a therapist, this is a great resource. But if you're not, this is a good resource to have as far as something to help improve your growth in your work. So the Let Them theory is awesome. And we're going to give you some examples of how to improve issues related to the concepts that are found in the book, some real life connections. And so I got to say that I think after this show today, you're going to really find the 8 transformative areas that she talks about are things that you can adopt. And you're going to get a whole lot of benefit out of this. I'm also going to make some comparisons to a couple of courses that I teach because there's a lot of overlap in the concepts related to codependency and boundaries, and really the lack of boundary setting and our overfunctioning and potential behaviors that suggest I can't be okay if you're not okay are what are predisposing us to behave in ways that we do that she talks about in this book. I'm going to go through the 8 concepts that she discusses in brief. And again, you're going to dig into the book and you're going to get this book and you're going to understand it even deeper. So the first concept that the Let Them theory talks about is acceptance. Mel emphasizes the importance of accepting others as they are without trying to change them. And this is so hard because we see the way someone is acting and we know that something could be better for them, right? We have an idea about how someone could change their choices and their behavior and improve the way their life looks. And sometimes we invite our opinions when we haven't been asked. So you have those friends maybe that are workaholics and are always busy when you're with them, and you might be frustrated by their constant work interruptions or distractions with their phones. And so one of the things we're going to think about is, let them do what they're doing, and then let you decide if you need to speak up, if you need to set a boundary. But ultimately, we want to practice empathy and understand that everybody has their own journey, and we want to respect people's autonomy and offer support without judgment. Now, that's not to say that you don't need to speak up if something feels boundaryless for you. So, for example, I have a friend that tends to work all the time, and I can let him. If he's got to work and he can't join us to be present, that's okay. I can also say, I don't want to do that tonight if you're not going to be able to disconnect from work for a little bit and hang out with us and be present. And I feel comfortable saying that, but it took me a long time to get there because I was busy going, this is what he does, and it's hard to be around someone who can't be in the moment. And so we want to respect someone's autonomy. We want to not have judgment about them. We all have different working styles and habits that sometimes clash with what we would do, maybe someone that you know. And so we want to accept that people have a unique approach. And then maybe we want to focus on collaboration rather than trying to change them. So again, let them do things their way. Let them work all night if that's how they choose to work. And then come up with some compromises that work so that you can be in relationship with them. The second concept that's pretty prevalent in the book is about boundaries. Boundaries are really hard to set when we are so concerned about being in disconnection with people, but it's really crucial for maintaining mental health. And people misuse the word boundaries all the time. I can't tell you how annoying it is to me when people say, I'm setting boundaries, I'm never talking to them again. And then my next question is, well, have you discussed with them how you felt about it when they said this or when they said that? And then they go, no, I'm not going to do that. And then I say, okay, well, that's a wall. That's not a boundary. And so a boundary is a pathway to intimacy and connection. A boundary says, hey, I love you and I care about you, but the way you spoke with me during our last conflict, that's not okay for me. And I don't want to be around you or be in relationship with you if that's how you're going to treat me. So a boundary offers a pathway to connection and intimacy. And so setting healthy boundaries, like I said, is crucial. I'll give you an example about my husband, a struggle of boundaries and growth with boundaries, and then ultimately where resentment ends up happening. So wants to be a good guy. He wants to be a good dad. He wants to be a good husband, a good papa, and a good employee. And oftentimes people will need him and want him to help with things because he's really good at things and he's really smart and resourceful and capable. And so people ask him a lot of different things. And and I have to say, I'm probably the most guilty because he's right there in proximity and I know he does everything awesome, but he feels overwhelmed often and he doesn't look at his own personal limits. He's not great at saying no. And he wants to please the people that he loves. He doesn't want to be a disappointment, like I said, especially with me. And so an area that he has to look at is this okay? Does this take away my bandwidth? Do I have capacity for it? And we want to look at what we need to do. So an improvement that I'd love to see him have is that he would define his own boundaries. And then if he can't do something, he'd say, I can't do that right now, but I can help you another time. And that he would practice saying no a little bit more so that he could protect his space. But this is an area that we all need to work on, protecting our emotional space and looking at what do we need and what do we want and how can we better engage with people and express what we need. I've got another example of a family member that will regularly ask for favors or interaction, or he'll want to know what we think or want to share about something. And it's like in the middle of something else, and it can be a little bit disruptive. And I notice in me, I want to hear about these things, especially because I care about, his experience. But sometimes it's not the best time. So I'm getting better at, politely but firmly saying, hey, I really want to hear this story. Can we catch up tomorrow? I've had a really long day or something like that. And so that's really an example about improving that boundary because ultimately it's no one else's job to protect your time. It's entirely your responsibility to protect your time and your own bandwidth, which leads me to the next concept that's discussed, which is self-responsibility. We've got to focus on our own actions and responses rather than trying to control others. So I'll give you an example. And this is a hard one for me. My mom ended up with diabetes when she, a few years back. And I was really anxious about her getting sick and her eating choices and concerned about what that was going to do to her in the long run if she didn't change her habits. And because of my control and fear and anxiety about what was going to happen to her if she didn't improve her habits, that she was going to get sicker and she was going to suffer. And I didn't want to see that. But ultimately, I'm the only child. And so that behavior is going to have some collateral damage and it's going to end up falling on my shoulders. And, if I really think through the let them theory, I would have to let her eat how she wants to eat or control her diabetes or not and get sicker or not. And then what does that mean about me? Well, I'd have to let me set boundaries around how much I would help or not help or be there when things were going wrong. And that's really hard, right? We don't want to tell people we love that we're not going to be there for them when they have made choices that ultimately have consequences. And so that can feel really inconsiderate, or it can feel like we're not loving and caring. And so I really had to dig in and do a lot of work in my own healing journey around what was going to be okay or not okay for me. But ultimately, that I couldn't be obsessing about her behavior and her choices because it was making me mean, it was making me controlling, and it was making her not want to be around me. And that's not the kind of relationship that I want to have. And so I had to dig in and I had to go let her do what she's going to do. She's going to suffer the consequences more than me, and she doesn't want that. So ultimately, that's kind of how you have to look at this type of stuff. So you have to focus on your own well-being. You have to trust the people to make their own choices, and you have to practice your own mindfulness and your own self-care so that you reduce your own urges to control things. And so this is just a good example about self-control. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the concept of letting go. And this is an area that everybody struggles with because the last thing anybody wants to feel is powerless. And when we feel powerless or we feel overwhelmed by the behavior of others, we sometimes have this internal desire or need to control people. And letting go, the whole thing is about recognizing my own growth, my own capabilities, my own capacities, and letting other people have their own journey. Let them fall down. Let them have their mistakes. Let them build their own resilience. Let them grow from their mistakes. We cannot curtail everybody's journeys. So I'm going to share an example about a client who really has struggled with this letting go concept. And, ultimately it's rooted in her history because she didn't have grownups that were there supporting her the way we need. And so she oftentimes ends up neglecting her needs. When I started seeing her, I should say, she didn't have the best self-care. She was incredibly over-functioning with her children. She was constantly trying to see what her husband needed, even when he never asked her about things. What would she do to take care of him? She wants to be a good wife. She wants to be a good mom. And she's really nervous and anxious about missing something. And she starts to get pretty sick and ends up having somatic issues and gastro issues. And the root of this is she can't let go if something bad might happen. And so one of the things that we had her working on was regular self-care activities, letting go activities like, her child forget their homework at home and, she lets go and lets her child have the consequence. It's not her job to take the homework, even though she doesn't want her child to feel, neglected or abandoned. Ultimately, the child doesn't learn to pack the backpack the night before if mom rescues the child. And this is really hard when we don't want our kids to suffer consequences for whatever they have to experience. And so when we adopt regular self-care activities, relaxation, exercise, mindfulness, it can be even things like taking care of getting manicures or pedicures, things like that, or massages once in a while so that you can prioritize your health. These types of things help us to look at our own growth and let go of the need to control other people's experiences. And it's really hard, especially if you're a parent. It's really, really hard to let go of the outcomes that your children ultimately need to face in order to grow from life's experiences. The next topic that Mel talks about in this book is resilience. And we do not build resilience by doing the hard things for others. Letting people have actions and let their actions have consequences ultimately are necessary for growth. And so in the Gifts of Imperfection, one of my favorite books by Brene Brown, she talks about a few things that are important on this concept, which is in order to develop hope about things, we've got to set realistic goals and plan ways to achieve them in order to stay motivated despite the obstacles and believe that things can improve. And we need to use critical awareness, which is recognizing and challenging societal norms that contribute to our feelings of inadequacy and shame. So going back to that client example, Martha's mom would bring her homework, and we have to realize, I have to do what's right for me so that my child learns in the ways of developing resilience in the way that I want them to. And so we've got to allow for those comparative suffering type things that we do or societal norms. We need to not allow those to contribute to our own feelings of inadequacy. We need to refuse to numb the negative emotions. People think that protective emotions are bad and that we should be really focused on feeling only good things. But I've got bad news. That's not how we're wired. We are wired with shame and pain and embarrassment and guilt and regret and anger and all these other protective emotions and fear that are not necessarily connecting emotions, but the whole gamut of emotions are really the beauty of being a human. And we want to allow for all of the emotions to be able to be part of our human experience, because that's how we can have genuine connection and ultimately joy, because we can't just numb the protective emotions. When we numb emotions, we numb them all. And so if we want to have a full color, a rainbow of life and emotional experiences, we've got to stop numbing our negative emotions. Here's another area that a lot of therapists are reluctant to discuss, and that's spirituality. We have to recognize that there's an interconnectedness of all life. And you don't have to necessarily believe in God, but hopefully you believe that there are things that are bigger than us, even if we're just looking at storms and waves in the ocean, and recognizing that we are just part of a system. So if we can recognize the richness of the interconnection of life, we can find purpose and belonging, and that helps us to navigate difficult times with more meaning about, how we all tick and connect together. So ultimately, if we avoid these feelings of connection and things like that, we end up lonely and resentful. And so we want to recognize that if we don't practice assertive communication, express our needs and preferences, we end up in disconnection. And that is not helpful for dealing with resilience. And we develop resilience by focusing on areas of improvement, relationships, and constructive feedback, which contribute to maintaining our self-worth. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is authenticity. And I love this word. It's becoming more popular, but I think that for me, it's really important because I struggled with a lot of perfectionism, a lot of worrying about what other people think, a lot of what if I do this, what will they say? And I know that it comes from my family system. Everything was, we don't let people know our dirty laundry, and we need to make sure that you look a certain way, and chewing gum is uncouth in public, and all these sorts of messages that were given to me when I was a kid. And so I became pretty anxious about the judgment or the opinions of others. And so in doing some of my own personal work, the Daring Way workshop that I am trained in, and Brene Brown's work from Daring Greatly, authenticity ended up being one of my primary values that I want to keep at the forefront of how I make decisions. And basically, this just means being true to yourself and letting others do the same. My way is not the right way. It's just a way. And letting other people have ways to do their life really helps to give you freedom in how we manage and how we can let go of our way of doing things. And it's more authentic to be able to go, yeah, I might do it this way, but you do it that way, and it's not for me. And so let people be authentic to who they are and let them have the consequences they have for doing it differently than you. And also let you learn things from people who do something different, which is another twist on it. And so I think that it's important to just step back and let other people handle their own lives and focus on your own growth and allow others to learn from their experiences. I can remember Taylor, my daughter-in-law, she and I are very close. And when she was a young mom, you remember when you were a young mom and I would have like feedback for you about things that I thought you should do as a mother with Emery. And you pushed back on me pretty hard. You set some pretty good boundaries. You remember that?
For no reason.
You're like, I pushed back because I pushed back. But truthfully, I was out of my lane because unless you asked me what you should do, it really was none of my business. And so when I think about our early dynamics and the evolution of that feedback, ironically, I was too intrusive before, and I believe I've backed off a lot more. But I think by number, for sure, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. But like for number 2, you're like, hey, what was those things you said I needed to do with number 1? Because I definitely want to do that for number 2.
By number 3, I was like, do whatever you want.
Do whatever you want. I can't anymore with all of the wildness, like what to do. Yeah, you're super outnumbered. But I think that you in our relationship, because it has taught me a lot, because when I think about, it's hard to let them, let your kids maybe not have warm clothes in winter or whatever. But like, it's also good for them to go, hey, Mom, I'm cold. I need a coat, and let them have the outcomes and learning experiences. And so I think that we have to stay in our own lane. We have to realize that people are going to do things the way they're going to do them, and they can grow and learn and evolve, and that we can come together and talk about things when it's invited.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. So another thing that she talks about in this book that seems like a no-brainer, but it's really hard to have empathy when we're mad at somebody or when we don't like how someone did something, and then they have a negative consequence. And so I want to share, Brene Brown talks about empathy as this ability to understand and share feelings of another person by connecting with something in ourselves that knows that same feeling. So I don't have to have had someone die in my life to know what loss feels like, to know what grief feels like. I can tap into that feeling in me so that I can better relate with someone. And true empathy done well really fuels disconnection, whereas sympathy, which is kind of a disconnected way to relate with someone, drives disconnection. And so some attributes of empathy that are really important to consider are perspective taking. You want the ability to take a perspective of another person and recognize their perspectives as their truth. The next thing we have to look at with empathy is staying out of judgment. We want to avoid judging another person's situation. We want to recognize that they have their own lens of life and their own previous experiences, and that's what drives their choices and their adaptations. And it's not for us to determine if it's right or if it's wrong, unless we're invited or asked. The next thing about empathy is recognizing emotion. You want to identify the emotion in others and then communicate the understanding. So back to the example of loss. It's like if someone I know has lost someone, I can say, I'm so sorry that you've lost someone, and I really understand, and I'm here for you. Please let me know what that might look like. And that's an empathetic response. Ultimately, with empathy, we're feeling with people. We're connecting with them by feeling with them rather than trying to fix the problem. That's not supportive. That's not empathetic to try to just fix someone's problem. And it's more vulnerable to show up with empathy because it just requires you to be simply present and acknowledge someone's pain without trying to offer solutions and understand and respect their perspectives. And so it can be a really vulnerable choice. And if we practice empathy and realize that everyone has their own journey, it helps us to better let them have the experience they're going to have. It helps us to respect autonomy and offer more support without judgment. Something I commonly hear about with my clients is related to some things with family dynamics regarding political differences, especially today. And it can be really impassioned about where we stand with policies and politics today because we're seeing a bit of an upside down response in our government right now. And it can feel personally powerless. And so it's hard to remain respectful, but we want to look at the person and seek to understand why they think the way they think. We want to try to have a non-judgmental perspective about it so that we can make sense and stay in connection with people, even if they have different perspectives than we have. And it's really, really hard. But I challenge you, if you have someone in your life, that you work on this because there's so much sadness and disconnection, and we just don't need more of that. It's hard to hate up close, so we need to move in and better understand what motivates people to feel the way that they feel. Which leads me to the last concept of the book that we're going to discuss, which is personal growth. When we're so busy externally focused, we are not looking inside at what we need to do for our own goals, our own dreams, our own healing journey. And so when we can let people be them and have their journey, we can let ourselves focus on our own desires and goals and work towards the outcomes that we want in our own lives. So, going back to that client I talked where she put her husband's needs before hers and her children's needs before hers, as she's evolved through her counseling experience, she's noticed her husband is a lot more helpful. Her husband chimes in and supports parenting duties more than he used to. Her children are a lot more resilient. They show examples of pride when they come through problem-solving skills. And she's able to set back a little bit more regularly and recognize that her lack of over-functioning and over-involvement is creating family dynamics that are improving in her life. And she's liking what she sees. So it is hard. It is an adjustment, but we really want to try to embrace some of these habits so that we can let go of outcomes that happen because of other people's choices. This book is awesome. I barely grazed the surface of it. The Let Them theory gives you so many valuable insights that can enhance your understanding of codependency, of boundaries, because by letting other people be themselves, setting healthy boundaries, prioritizing your own self-care, you're going to have a much more fulfilling and balanced life and relationships. So I really encourage you, get this book, The Let Them Theory. It's awesome, on my bookshelf, and I want to hear what you think about it. It's a really good resource. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you grab Mel Robbins' book, The Let Them Theory, and start changing your own mindset about your interactions and responsibility in the lives of others. So until we meet again, remember to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.